The Back to the Future movies are amazing. They stand as close to perfect as movies are ever likely to get. But when you're watching Back to the Future Part 2, somewhere between admiring the story, the acting, the direction, and the effects, you might find yourself thinking, why is Old Biff such a bad driver? Okay, maybe it's just me. But what if I told you that Old Biff's terrible driving isn't just a quirky character trait? It's actually a very important component of the movie. Notice I said it's important to the movie, not the story. We see clear evidence of just how bad a driver Old Biff is in two scenes. First when he steals the DeLorean in the distant future of 2015, and again after travelling back to 1955 when he drives his younger self home. There's no sign that young Biff is this incompetent behind the wheel. He's aggressive when pursuing victims in his car, but that's calculated and ruthless. What Old Biff does, that's just bad driving. We never see 1985 middle-aged Biff behind the wheel. So this reckless bin-crashing, hedge-mangling mess behind the wheel seems to be a trait unique to Old Biff. Which is interesting because when Old Biff despairs at his younger self about how dumb he used to be,
it's leave, you idiot. Make like a tree and leave. You sound like a damn fool when you say it wrong.
All right then, leave!
It turns out he's actually gotten worse at driving over time. And oddly enough, that detail ends up mattering more than you'd think. The first instance we see of Old Biff's bad driving in 2015 is a setup for the second instance we see of him in 1955. In storytelling, a setup is when a character behaves in a certain way or a plot device is introduced early in the film to prepare the audience for something that will happen later. It helps ensure that moment doesn't feel forced or out of nowhere. For example, in the first Back to the Future, 1955 Doc initially insists on not knowing anything about his own future.
No man should know too much about his own destiny.
You don't understand.
I do understand. If I know too much about my own future, I can endanger my own existence. Just as you've endangered yours.
But the film subtly shows he's curious about what may lie ahead.
Oh my God. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. Run for it, Marty!
Doc?
Fascinating device. It's video unit.
This quiet setup makes it feel more believable when he later reveals that he did read Marty's warning note after all.
What about all that talk about screwing up future events, the space-time continuum?
Well, I figured. What the hell?
It doesn't come across as a sudden or convenient change of heart. Likewise, early in Back to the Future Part 3, 1955 Doc mentions that he's a lifelong fan of the writings of Jules Verne.
You know, it was the writings of Jules Verne that had a profound effect on my life. It was when I was 11 that I first read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then I realized that I must devote my life to science.
That moment sets up a later scene where older Doc bonds with Clara over their shared love of Verne's stories.
I never met a woman who liked Jules Verne before.
I never ever met a man like you before.
Because it's been established earlier, their connection feels earned, not like it was added just to force a romance. So let's come back to Old Biff. His reckless driving isn't a throwaway joke. It was so important to the movie that the writers made sure to establish it early, so that when it happens again, it feels completely natural. But that raises a question. Why was it so important that he be a bad driver in the first place? Important enough that it needed to be set up. What does portraying Old Biff as a chaotic, bin-crashing, driveway-missing, hedge-mangling driver actually accomplish for the movie? Because it's not crucial to the story, it doesn't help him succeed, and it doesn't change the plot. And yet they set it up in the movie. They made sure you'd buy it, which means something else must be going on. Something about the way Old Biff drives and the mess he makes is serving a different purpose. And that's where things get clever. To fully appreciate why this matters, we need to take a quick detour into the world of visual effects. Back to the Future Part 2 was released in US cinemas in November 1989, right in the middle of a period when many of Hollywood's top directors were pushing the boundaries of visual effects. This shift had begun in earnest with George Lucas's Star Wars in 1977, and throughout the 1980s, innovation was accelerating. Earlier in 1989, James Cameron released The Abyss, showing groundbreaking digital water effects. In the next few years, Cameron and Steven Spielberg would go even further, releasing Terminator 2 Judgment Day and Jurassic Park, both of which featured pioneering uses of CGI that would change the industry. Meanwhile, Back to the Future director Robert Zemeckis had already broken new ground with Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 1988, a technical marvel blending live action and animation in a way never seen before. Zemeckis wasn't just part of this movement, he was right in the middle of it. In Back to the Future Part 2, Zemeckis took on a technical challenge, putting multiple versions of the same character, played by the same actor, into a single shared scene. But this idea wasn't new. The concept of one actor appearing on screen as two people at once goes back over a century. But one of the first major films to use this technique extensively was the 1961 Disney movie The Parent Trap, where Hayley Mills played twin sisters. In some of the scenes of the two twins together, you might notice that the shot is framed with them unusually far apart, with an obvious gap between them. This became very noticeable when the movie was cropped to fit the 4x3 televisions of the time, where they seemed to be crowding the edges of the frame. And that's due to the particular technique which was used. To demonstrate how this technique works, I shot this outside in the garden in 15 minutes, using only my iPhone on a tripod, and most of that time was spent trying to get my dog Lenny to sit in the right place. First you get a shot of Lenny sitting on the left. Then, making sure you don't move the camera at all, you move Lenny to the right of the frame. Then you take half of each shot and combine them together in the editing software. An impressive technique, but with limitations. Firstly, it's important to ensure that nothing crosses the matte line between the two shots, or else the effect will be ruined. Which explains why the two Hayley Mills characters were shot obviously separated. It reduces the chances of accidentally crossing the matte line and ruining the shot. The second limitation is that the actor has to perform each half of the scene one at a time, and the camera has to stay completely still in between. Move it even a millimetre and the whole trick falls apart. So with these limitations, provided we can get the performers in the right place and we don't move the camera, we can create quite a nice trick. But then the Steadicam was invented in 1975. A rig that let the camera float like a ghost through a scene, even when the operator was sprinting behind it. This meant that from the late 1970s onwards, cinema and television in general became much less static, and as audiences grew used to even simple dialogue scenes featuring camera movement, a sudden perfectly still shot for a doubling effect started to feel jarring and out of place. And so along comes director Robert Zemeckis and special effects company Industrial Light and Magic to take the doubling up effect to the next level. They did it using a motion control camera rig called the Vista Glide.
What it is it's a computerized robot camera which allows us to do like elaborate camera moves, and then the computer memorizes every nuance of that camera move and then plays it back exactly the same way every time. So what that allows us to do is it allows us to have one actor play multiple roles in the same shot, but not have to have the camera locked down like they used to have to do in the old movies.
It would perform the move once for the first pass, then repeat it exactly for the second, and in the case of this shot, a third pass, as Michael J. Fox played his older self, his son, and his daughter. But what does all this have to do with Old Biff's driving? Remember how I said it was the second example of his driving in 1955 which was important? The Vista Glide solved the problem of the static camera, but it still left the problem of crossing the matte line between the two shots. They were clearly aware of that challenge and keen to overcome it. In this scene with two Doc Browns, they cleverly hide the matte line behind a lamppost as older Doc hands younger Doc the 3/4 wrench. That way the arms don't need to line up perfectly, just closely enough to sell the illusion. But the garage scene presented a trickier problem. As Old Biff drives towards the garage, we clearly see Thomas F. Wilson as young Biff in the passenger seat. That means Old Biff, at least in that shot, is actually a stunt driver in disguise. Not a big issue, since his face isn't visible. Then in the next shot, Old Biff drives in and parks the car. Close up of Old Biff, and then pull away to show the shot complete with later footage of Thomas F. Wilson as young Biff. The one thing they couldn't do was show the car pulling in with both Biffs clearly visible in the same uninterrupted frame. That would have required two near identical shots, one with Old Biff driving and one with young Biff as a passenger, stitched together perfectly, tricky enough with static actors, let alone a moving vehicle. But rather than imply they drove in together by shooting it from behind, they got as close to the shot they wanted as possible. So Old Biff drives in with a stand-in for young Biff, and to conceal the double's face, they frame him as doubled over the passenger door as if he's still recovering from the ride. And to justify that awkward position, movie logic kicks in. Young Biff is conveniently hunched over the door as if Old Biff's while driving just happened to solve a tricky camera setup. This all goes to show the extent to which director Robert Zemeckis and his team went to make one special effects shot work. And you have to admire that dedication.